Hello, very beautiful community. There is a skill that we badly need to survive this informational environment, that the way social media scrambles our brain is very difficult for us to exercise. I want to talk to you about it. And this is going to be one of the more direct and personal open chats I've had with you. So buckle in. I think I want to mention three things and just see how we go. And that'll bring out this skill that's so important for us. I want to share a personal message that I've got here, I've just received from a friend, and I've got her permission to share it in public. I want to share from a different light a story I've mentioned a couple of times already about how a friend of mine got taken by a shark when I lived in Tonga. And I want to share a moment when I was present and a wonderful and famous philosopher who normally has this skill on a good level that we're going to talk about today, lost it and lost his capacity to exercise it, and what we can learn from that. All right, so let's rock and roll. I got a message from a friend this morning because I took down a chat I did a day or two ago about the case about which you don't need to know anything of the late Cambridge academic Jason Arday. And I took the video down because what happened was that YouTube pushed it into an algorithmic bubble of people who are alien to the channel. And we had a whole bunch of alt-right comments which were celebrating death and dancing on this man's grave rather than making any critical, constructive points, and then getting a huge number of likes from people who'd never been on the channel before. Because YouTube shows me if you've made comments in the past, and these were new people, and I couldn't allow the algorithm to push this community in that direction. So I kept watching it, and as the proportion of new viewers coming in increased, I can see that on the back end of YouTube, I decided to take the video down. And my video centered on compassion. And if you want to see what I said, it's still up in written form on Substack. And my first 3 points were just compassion, compassion, compassion. And I got this message from a friend about the reaction to the death of Jason Arday. And you need to know nothing about the case. So this is what my friend says. And my friend is off social media, so you don't need to know who she is. I'll just say that she's had a varied career. She's been an academic for some time. She was a little bit in politics. She was a speechwriter for one of the prime ministers in a European country. But she is off social media. She doesn't participate in social media at all. So she is saying, so much of the content people made in response was disgusting, coming from all sides like vultures circulating around the body of this man who died. Anti-woke, woke, right, left, black, neurodivergent, neurotypical, all of them trying to promote their agenda. Just disgusting. And by the way, let's already begin framing this concept that we need. This is not me speaking to you. This is not my sensibility necessarily or my language. This is me sharing with you something I like that a friend of mine has shared with me. I was thinking yesterday how with social media we culturally and anthropologically lost capacity to observe silence, which has been embedded in all our rituals and customs, and lost the ability to feel deeply before speaking. The only healthy first reactions in something like this are either silence and shutting up for a while, and or a call for compassion, nothing else. We don't throw gasoline on a burning man, we carry him water. And so what she's saying, and you get it straight away, is that the problem is not just people coming along and making alt-right talking points. She's also saying that it's a problem if a day or two after this has happened, you come up with a completely vitriolic essay attacking, let us say, the ignorant and dumb and racist remarks of Mr. Kofnas, who was going after Jason Arday. because she was saying just that mobilization of the event for your possibly correct ideological purpose is untimely. And there's something unhealthy about everybody jumping immediately to try to make their own point. Now, let's be clear, this is not just social media. This is also human beings, right? Because this is a personal video, let me straight away say something personal. When my profoundly close friend Greg died in 2011, because deaths, and especially premature, unexpected deaths, bring out the worst in people. I witnessed a little bit of that too. Greg was a gay man, and his parents, who he loved, were on a journey of acceptance of that. He came from a working class neighborhood of Athens, Piraeus. And Greg would have definitely wanted his parents involved as much as possible in the mourning and celebration of his life. But there were a couple of people who took a kind of a gay rights position. Well, they didn't accept him fully yet, and so they should be excluded from this process, right? This was a mobilization of my friend's sudden death, which was completely antithetical to his own spirit, right? In the service of some generally impeccable principle. And here I want to recall for you the most wonderful bit of ritual outside of the West that I have ever encountered. A few of you who follow me closely know that once an acquaintance of mine was taken by a tiger shark, and I won't get into the details of this, except to say that it was a very tragic story that happened around 2006 or so. And the locals in this northern island group in Tonga did something ritualistically extraordinary, and it was doubly extraordinary. What they did was that on the way from the makeshift morgue where we all saw Tessa a couple of hours after she lost her life, on the way to the airstrip, which was a several-kilometer ride, it felt like the entire population of the island group came out and sat cross-legged with their hands like that every few meters along the road for several kilometers. Felt like the entire population of the island, nearly the entire population, came out. It felt like that. And lined the road for a couple of kilometers in pouring rain. So this was an extraordinary ritual, a spontaneous ritual, and a silent ritual. And here's what makes it doubly extraordinary. According to fairly prevalent local mythology, you only lose your life at sea if you're somehow morally bankrupt. And a few days later, some of the locals began to ventilate that point with us about whether or not this played a role for Tessa. And a few Westerners strongly made the point that shark behavior is not sensitive to the moral properties of human beings, right? A tiger shark doesn't read Bernard Williams. But they held off making that point for several days, and they immediately made this ritual. In the end, they were persuaded actually that there was nothing morally wrong with Tessa, and got on with this mythology in a halfway broken down way, because they started only applying it to locals. And when a boy from a neighboring village to mine was taken out to sea by a rip, because he was Tongan, they still came back to that moral story. But that wasn't going to last long. When the mythology begins to fragment in the face of reflection like that, it's just going to collapse. It's just a matter of time. But they had, a challenging narrative about what happened. They stayed silent and they did the ritual. It was extraordinarily powerful. So now I want to tell you this philosophical story. And before it, let's just name the damn concept we're talking about. It's something like the economy of ethical sentiment, a term that either I borrow closely from Bernard Williams, one of my philosophical heroes, or is literally Bernard's term, and I don't know. And that's another wonderful illustration of double-mindedness and ambiguity, because of course one of the controversies around Mr. R. Day was plagiarism. And plagiarism is a very, very serious academic crime. At the same time, it's also important to understand that there are some things about which you can't be black and white. There's a lot of terrible plagiarism which is black and white, but some things aren't. So, for instance, I don't know whether I've stolen that phrase verbatim from Bernard anymore, or whether it's based on something like what he might have said. And so I could be copying him without giving him credit. But if he saw me do this, or if his wife Patricia saw me do this, they think that's wonderful. That's love of Bernard, in a sort of way that is evoked by the story the psychoanalyst Adam Phillips likes to tell about how he first read Winnicott's Play and Reality, a book that he was so transfixed by that he felt that he had written it himself, even though obviously he hadn't understood all of it when he read it as a teenager. So it's worth making this footnote about the absurdity of how literal-mindedness can go too far and people can fail to keep two things in mind at the same time. But the concept that we're talking about is basically a proportionality of your ethical response to something. And that means not just proportionality where you say, well, I don't want to react too much like this or too much like that, or too little like this or too little like that. It's also where you tie your proportionality to temporality. Something big has happened, might be something in your life. There is a difference between what you say on day 2 and what you say on day 102 after it's happened, right? It's not the same. And it's tied not just to temporality, but also to a sense of conflict and ambiguity. So you have a palpable sense that it's important to feel some things, but also not feel them too little or too much, and not let them underweigh or overweigh some other things that pull in the opposite direction that you also need to feel. Ambiguity is very important. Freud would tell you that love and hate are constitutively connected. And you might say, well, no, I don't feel that. I love my husband, I love my wife, I love my children. There's no hate there. And Freud would tell you that you probably don't really believe that. And if you really believe that, then you wouldn't be very good at dealing in the most loving way with the ambiguity of some of your feelings toward your most loved ones. So the philosophical story. And because we're being sort of respectful and trying to balance our economy of ethical sentiment, we're not going to name this philosopher. He's in his 80s. He is a wonderful philosopher and also a wonderful public communicator about philosophy, but he had a bad day on that day. And on the other day when he wrote that paper that I'll mention. The paper was about a wonderful paper by my hero Bernard Williams called Moral Luck, which centers a story about a man who abandoned his family. And the man is Gauguin, one of the 4 greatest painters of the last 150 years. And there's a line in Bernard's essay about what Gauguin might say after seeing his family again, having abandoned them and abandoned his children and gone off to paint in Tahiti. His paintings in Tahiti were a glorious success and produced some of the most important work in the history of Western art when they were great. When they were just good, they began to filter through elements of age and gender inappropriate objectification of a very, very ugly kind. So when Gauguin is great, he is ethically impeccable. When Gauguin is good, he is ethically dirty. But the greatest works were extraordinarily done and ethically pure, without ethical residue, as it were. And what do you tell your family if you've gone off, you've made this extraordinary contribution to humanity, but you've abandoned your family and your children? And of course, earlier on in his life, he produced several extraordinary paintings of his children. There's an extraordinary painting of his son, Clovis, sleeping from the mid-1880s. And Clovis, I think, was born in 79. And there's also a painting of Aline sleeping. Aline was born in 77, and this painting is from the early 1880s. And these are paintings that make young mothers cry when you put them in front of them. And then he just abandoned his family. And Bernard said, in a certain way, if Gauguin speaks to his family after this, he should have nothing decent to say. He should just shut the hell up, because there's nothing you can decently say. At least that's something that should be part of the economy of ethical sentiment for you. And the philosopher, who I'm going to zing, but lovingly because he's really wonderful, said, what a silly thing of Bernard to have said. Because think about this. Imagine that there's a young couple, and one of them, let's say the partner, call him Ricky, decides to go to Juilliard and do music, and somehow, because of how much time that takes, lets the relationship take a back seat in a destructive way. It would be ridiculous to say that Ricky should have nothing to say to his girlfriend, right? It's ridiculous that Ricky needs to be silent, right? All that Ricky needs to do is A, be a better boyfriend, and B, make sure he can, read a score properly after his time in Juilliard and be a better musician. So what is Bernard doing there? What is he talking about? Of course, it's not that you need to say nothing. You just need to explain what you did. And at that point, I turned to Patricia Williams, Bernard's wife, who is remarkable and very important figure in the world of editing and publishing in the humanities and philosophy. So she understands all this stuff really well. And I said, Patricia, WTF? And she said, yeah, of course. Bernard meant that it's just in that particular case that one should stay silent, and that one should stay silent only as one of several responses. So Bernard is saying, after you've done something so unspeakable to your family, a part of your reaction is that there is nothing decent you can say. But that's on a Tuesday. Whereas, of course, on a Friday, you spend 4 hours explaining to your wife what the hell you did. So it's both. And that's what this wonderful philosopher was completely missing with his disanalogous Juilliard example, and with his lack of understanding of the fact that the point there was precisely that you should have nothing at all to say and a great deal to say, and that both should be part of your economy of ethical sentiment. And now you see how algorithms make this, which is something we already struggle with, even more difficult for us. Because they want to break this element of temporality. They want to break this element of conflictiveness. They want to break this element of ambiguity. And they want to position you into a particular response. And whereas you should have 7 things in your mind that center themselves differently across time in a healthy ethical reaction to something that's happened in your life or in the world, algorithms want you to have a reduced reaction, a reaction that tracks the surface rather than the substance of what you've read or watched, and the reaction that is based on the cultivation in a theatrical way of your moral identity developed in a kind of consumerist shopping type way, right? Rather than in the cultivation of an authentic and healthy ethical response. You need to cultivate this skill in yourself and in your children if you don't want to go potty in our informational environment. Thanks so much for surviving this long chat with me. Lots and lots of love.